January 29, 1945. 2:47 p.m. Holzheim, Belgium. First Sergeant Leonard Funk walks around the corner of a snow-covered farmhouse and stops dead in his tracks. His brain takes a split second to process the impossible image in front of him. 90 German soldiers are staring at him. Half of them are holding MP-40 submachine guns and Kar-98 rifles leveled at his chest. The other half are frantically picking up weapons from a pile on the ground. Kneeling in the snow, hands behind their heads, are 4 American paratroopers, Funk's men, who look terrified. These 90 Germans were prisoners 20 minutes ago. 80 of them had been captured by Funk's company during the assault on this village. They were being guarded by just 4 men because that was all Funk could spare. Now, they are free, they are armed, and they are organizing to attack Funk's company from the rear. A German officer steps forward from the pack. He is tall, arrogant, and he knows he has won. He shoves the barrel of his MP-40 submachine gun hard into Leonard Funk's stomach. He screams a command in German. Funk doesn't speak German. Neither do any of the other Americans. The officer screams again, louder, his face turning red with rage, veins bulging in his neck. He is demanding surrender. He is demanding Funk drop his weapon and get on his knees. Leonard Funk looks at the 90 Germans. He looks at his 4 disarmed soldiers. He looks at the MP-40 pressed against his gut, a weapon that can fire 500 rounds per minute and cut him in half instantly. And then, Leonard Funk does something that defies every instinct of survival. He starts laughing. It starts as a chuckle, then turns into a loud, hysterical cackle. The German officer freezes. His face twists with confusion, then pure rage. He screams louder. Funk laughs harder. The German soldiers behind the officer look at each other, unsettled. Is this American insane? Is this a trap? For a few crucial seconds, the Germans hesitate. And in those few seconds, Leonard Funk stops laughing. What happens next takes less than 60 seconds. 21 Germans will die. The rest will throw down their weapons in terror. And Leonard Funk, a 5'5" clerk from Pennsylvania, will earn the Medal of Honor for one of the most violent acts of individual combat in the history of World War II. All because he couldn't stop laughing. To understand why Leonard Funk didn't surrender that day, to understand why a man would choose certain death over captivity, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to understand that Leonard Funk wasn't supposed to be a killer. He was supposed to be a statistic. Leonard Alfred Funk Jr. was born on August 27, 1916, in Braddock Township, Pennsylvania. He was a small kid in a hard steel town. 5'5", 140 pounds soaking wet. In the steel mills of Pittsburgh, size mattered, and Funk didn't have it. But he had something else. A quiet, terrifying intensity. When the war started, the army looked at him and marked him for a desk job. Clerk typist. That was his designation. He was supposed to spend the war filing paperwork, making coffee, and typing reports in a warm office far behind the lines. But Funk volunteered for the paratroopers. In 1941, the Airborne was a new concept, a suicide club for the craziest men in the army. Jumping out of perfectly good airplanes behind enemy lines, surrounded, outgunned, with no way home. The training at Camp Toccoa and Fort Benning was designed to weed out the weak. It was brutal. Known as the Currahee method, stands alone, it broke men physically and mentally. They ran up mountains until they vomited. They did push-ups in the mud until their arms failed. The washout rate was nearly 50%. The instructors looked at Funk's short stature and pushed him harder than the big guys. They expected him to quit. They expected the little clerk to ring the bell and go home. Funk didn't break. He thrived. He learned that in the paratroopers, size doesn't matter as much as aggression. He learned to handle the M1A1 Thompson submachine gun until it was an extension of his own arm. He mastered the violent art of close-quarters battle. By the time he shipped out to England with the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 82nd Airborne Division, he wasn't a clerk anymore. He was a weapon. But training is not war. The real transformation happened in Normandy. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The night the sky fell. Funk jumped into France at 2 a.m. Like thousands of other paratroopers, the drop was a disaster. The C-47 transport planes, dodging intense German flak, scattered the 82nd and 101st Airborne across hundreds of square miles of French countryside. Funk was dropped miles from his drop zone, alone in the dark, deep behind enemy lines. When he hit the ground, he landed hard. His ankle twisted violently, a severe sprain that would have crippled a normal man. The pain was blinding. He was alone. He was injured. He was surrounded by the German 91st Infantry Division. Most men in that situation would have found a hedgerow, hidden, and waited for the main invasion force. Not Funk. He gathered his chute, buried it to hide his presence, and started hunting. Despite the limp, despite the pain shooting up his leg with every step, he moved through the hedgerows like a ghost. Over the next few hours, he found other lost paratroopers, men from different units, scared, leaderless, confused. They looked at the small sergeant with the bad leg and saw something in his eyes. Leadership. Funk took command. "Follow me," he said. And they did. For 10 days, this small man led a ragtag group of 18 soldiers through 40 miles of German-occupied territory. This wasn't a walk in the park. This was a 10-day running gunfight. They were constantly hunted. German patrols were everywhere with dogs and half-tracks. Funk insisted on walking point the entire time, limping at the front of the column, the first one to make contact, the first one to fire. They ambushed German supply trucks to get food. They cut communication wires. They killed sentries silently in the dark. Funk turned a survival march into a one-man guerrilla war. When they finally linked up with Allied lines, the officers couldn't believe it. He had brought every single man home alive. Not one casualty. For this, he earned the Silver Star. But Normandy was just the warm-up. September 1944. Operation Market Garden. The invasion of Holland. The largest airborne operation in history. Funk jumped again. This time, his unit was tasked with securing the high ground near the Vaal River to protect the gliders coming in with reinforcements. During the advance, the battlefield turned into a slaughterhouse. Funk spotted a German battery of 320mm anti-aircraft guns. These weren't just machine guns. These were cannons designed to shred airplanes. They were firing horizontally, tearing apart the Allied gliders coming in for landing. Funk watched as wooden gliders disintegrated in mid-air, spilling men and equipment onto the fields. He watched helpless soldiers being cut to pieces before they could even unbuckle their seatbelts. The battery was dug in, fortified, and guarded by 20 German infantrymen. Funk had 2 men with him. 3 Americans against 20 Germans and 3 heavy cannons. The military math said retreat. It said call for artillery. It said stay low and survive. Funk didn't care about the math. He cared about the men in those gliders. He turned to his 2 soldiers, checked his Thompson, and said, "We are taking them out." They charged. It was a suicide run across open ground. Funk led the assault, firing his Thompson from the hip, screaming like a banshee. The Germans were stunned by the ferocity of the attack. They assumed they were being hit by a platoon, not 3 maniacs. Funk killed the gun crews before they could turn the cannons on him. He cleared the infantry support with grenades and point-blank fire. In minutes, the guns were silent. The gliders landed safely. Dozens, maybe hundreds of lives were saved because Leonard Funk decided to attack a fortified battery with 2 guys. For this, he earned the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest medal for valor in the United States military. He was now one of the most decorated soldiers in the 82nd Airborne. But the medals didn't matter to him. He didn't wear them. He put them in his pocket and got back to work. What mattered was the killing. By the winter of 1944, Leonard Funk had changed. The clerk from Pennsylvania was gone. In his place was a man who had seen too much death, too much cruelty. He had seen friends blown apart. He had seen the brutality of the SS. And then came the Battle of the Bulge. December 16, 1944. Hitler launched his final, desperate offensive through the Ardennes. The weather was brutal, the coldest winter in decades. Temperatures dropped to zero. Snow piled up waist-high. American soldiers were freezing to death in their foxholes. Trench foot was claiming as many men as German bullets. But it wasn't the cold that hardened Leonard Funk's heart. It was the Malmedy massacre. On December 17th, word reached the 82nd Airborne that an SS Panzer unit under Joachim Paper had captured over 80 American artillerymen near Malmedy. They had lined them up in a field, disarmed them, and then mowed them down with machine guns. They walked among the wounded, laughing, and shot them in the head with pistols. The news spread like a virus through the American lines. It changed the rules of engagement forever. Before Malmedy, surrender was an honorable option. After Malmedy, it was a death sentence. The paratroopers of the 82nd made a pact: no SS prisoners. And we never, ever surrender. Leonard Funk took that pact personally. He decided right then and there that he would die before he raised his hands to a German. He would never let himself be executed in a snowy field. That decision is what led him to the farmhouse in Holzheim on January 29th. The 82nd Airborne was pushing the Germans back, slowly, painfully, mile by frozen mile. Company C was tasked with taking the town of Holzheim. It was a brutal, house-to-house fight in deep snow. Funk was acting executive officer of the company because so many officers had been killed or wounded. He organized a makeshift platoon of clerks, cooks, and radio operators, men who weren't infantry, and led them into the attack. Every man is a rifleman today, he told them. Nobody sits this one out. They swept through the town, clearing houses with grenades and bayonets. The fighting was confused and bloody. But they won. They captured 80 Germans in a bewildered herd. These were a mix of Wehrmacht regulars and die-hard SS. Funk ordered 4 of his men to guard them in a courtyard while he went to check on the rest of the company. It seemed secure. The battle was winding down. The shooting had stopped. But in war, silence is a lie. While Funk was gone, checking the perimeter, a German patrol slipped through the lines. These weren't ordinary conscripts. These were experienced soldiers wearing white winter camouflage capes, moving invisibly against the snow. They spotted the prisoners. They spotted the 4 American guards who were relaxed, smoking cigarettes, thinking the fight was over. The German patrol attacked with ruthless efficiency, overwhelming the guards before they could fire a shot. They freed the 80 prisoners. They raided a nearby weapons cache and passed out rifles and MP-40s. Suddenly, the courtyard was filled with an entire company of armed, angry Germans. They were organizing. They were preparing to flank the Americans, to slaughter Funk's men who were spread out and unsuspecting in the village. This was the situation Leonard Funk walked into. He came around the corner of the farmhouse, boots crunching on the snow, Thompson slung casually over his shoulder. He expected to see his prisoners sitting in the snow. Instead, he saw an army. The German officer. At the front saw the stripes on Funk's sleeve. First sergeant. A leader. A prize. He rushed forward, jamming the muzzle of his MP-40 into Funk's stomach. "Hand hoch," he screamed. "Hands up. Surrender." The officer was frantic. He knew the main American force was nearby. He needed to silence this sergeant quickly. He screamed again, spit flying from his mouth. His finger tightened on the trigger. One twitch, one sneeze, and Funk would be cut in half by 9mm bullets. Funk looked at the officer. He looked at the 90 men behind him. He looked at his own 4 men, kneeling in the snow, eyes wide with terror. He realized the absurdity of it. He realized that according to all the laws of probability, he was already dead. There was no way out. The logic of war said surrender or die. And that is when the laugh started. It wasn't a hero's laugh. It wasn't a tactic at first. It was a laugh of pure disbelief, perhaps a bit of madness brought on by 3 years of combat. He doubled over, chuckling. I can't believe this, he might have thought. I survived Normandy. I survived Holland. I survived the Bulge. And I'm going to die because I walked around a corner. The laughter grew louder. It became hysterical. The German officer was confused. Why is he laughing? Does he have a squad behind him? Are there snipers watching us? Is this a trap? The officer hesitated. He looked around nervously, scanning the windows of the farmhouse. That hesitation was his fatal mistake. It was the only opening Leonard Funk needed. Leonard Funk knew the mechanics of the M1A1 Thompson submachine gun better than he knew the back of his hand. He knew it weighed 10 pounds. He knew the bolt was heavy. He knew that it fired from an open bolt position. He knew that at this range, literally touching the enemy, he didn't need to aim. He just needed to clear the leather. Still laughing, acting like he was hysterical, acting like he had snapped, Funk slowly moved his right hand toward his shoulder. To the German officer, it looked like surrender. It looked like he was reaching to unsling the weapon and hand it over. The German officer watched him, expecting the gun to be dropped in the snow. Schnell, the officer barked. Fast. Funk moved fast, but not to surrender. In a motion that witnesses later described as a blur, a magic trick, Funk whipped the Thompson down from his shoulder. He didn't bring it to his eye. He fired from the hip. His finger found the trigger before the stock even hit his side. He didn't fire a controlled burst. He held the trigger down. The .45 caliber rounds, heavy, slow, devastating slugs, slammed into the German officer's chest. The Thompson roared. The officer was dead before his brain could register that he had been shot. He collapsed backward into the snow. Funk didn't stop. He didn't pause to admire his work. He pivoted on his heel, the Thompson roaring like a dragon in his hands. He sprayed the front line of the German soldiers who were still reacting to their officer's death. The Thompson had a 30-round magazine. At 600 rounds per minute, it empties in 3 seconds. Funk made those 3 seconds count. He killed the 3 men closest to him instantly. Then he did the hardest thing in combat, the thing that separates the living from the dead. He reloaded while under fire. The Germans were shooting back now. Bullets zipped past his head like angry hornets. One round clipped his helmet. Another tore through his jacket. But Funk was a small target, 5'5", and he was moving constantly, a whirlwind of muzzle flashes and noise. He dropped the empty mag into the snow. He grabbed a fresh 30-round stick mag from his webbing. He slammed it home. He racked the heavy bolt back. And he kept shooting. By now, he was screaming. The laughter was gone. Get M. Get M. He yelled to his 4 guards. The guards, seeing their sergeant taking on an entire army by himself, snapped out of their shock. They grabbed rifles dropped by the dead Germans. They picked up MP-40s. They opened fire. Now it was 5 Americans against the mob. But the Germans were panicked. Their leader was dead. There was a maniac with a machine gun killing them by the dozen. They couldn't tell how many Americans were attacking. The echo in the courtyard made it sound like a battalion. Funk burned through another magazine. He targeted anyone who looked like they were trying to lead. He targeted the machine gunners. He moved forward, attacking the 90 men, forcing them back by sheer violence of action. He was walking into the fire, the Thompson chugging rhythmically. Within 45 seconds, less time than it takes to tie your shoes, the snow was littered with bodies. 21 Germans lay dead or dying. 24 more were wounded, screaming in the snow, clutching shattered limbs. The remaining 45 Germans looked at the pile of corpses. They looked at the small American sergeant reloading his gun for the 3rd time, his face a mask of soot and rage. And they broke. The will to fight evaporated. They threw down their rifles. They threw up their hands. Nicht schießen. Don't shoot, they screamed. The courtyard went silent, except for the moans of the wounded and the metallic click of Funk locking a fresh magazine into his Thompson. Leonard Funk stood over the body of the officer who had threatened him. He was breathing hard, steam rising from his barrel in the cold air. He looked at his 4 guards, who were shaking with adrenaline. "That was the stupidest thing I've ever seen," Funk reportedly said. Then he reached into his pocket and lit a cigarette. His hands weren't shaking. He didn't brag. He didn't celebrate. He simply reorganized the prisoners, set up a new guard detail, and radioed his commander that the sector was secure. Sector secure. Prisoners recaptured. Situation normal. Situation normal. He had just killed 21 men in under a minute. When the rest of the company arrived and saw the carnage, the bodies stacked in the snow, the blood freezing into red ice, they couldn't believe one man had done it. They counted the shell casings. They looked at the angles. It was mathematically impossible. But the prisoners told the story. They pointed at the little sergeant and whispered, "The laughing devil." Word of the Holzheim incident went all the way to the top. General James Gavin, Jumpin' Jim, commander of the 82nd Airborne, heard the report. He recommended Funk for the Medal of Honor immediately. But the war wasn't over for Funk. He kept fighting. He fought through the rest of the Bulge. He fought into Germany. He survived the war without another scratch. On September 5, 1945, Leonard Funk stood in the White House. The war was over. The killing was done. President Harry S. Truman placed the blue ribbon of the Medal of Honor around his neck. Truman, who had been an artillery officer in World War I, understood what he was looking at. He looked at the citations. Silver Star, Distinguished Service Cross, 3 Purple Hearts, and now the Medal of Honor. He looked at the short, unassuming man standing before him. Truman shook his hand and said the famous words, "I would rather have this medal than be President of the United States." Leonard Funk just nodded. He didn't give a speech. He didn't write a book. He went home to Pennsylvania. And this is where the story becomes even more remarkable. Most men who do what Leonard Funk did, men who touch that level of violence, who kill 21 people in 45 seconds, they don't come back normal. They are haunted. They are broken. They spend their lives trying to forget. But Funk went back to work. He got a job with the Veterans Administration. For the next 30 years, the man who was the deadliest paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne sat at a desk and helped other veterans get their benefits. He helped them fill out forms. He helped them get medical care. He listened to their stories. He never told them his. Most of the men he helped had no idea that the quiet clerk helping them with their pension paperwork was a legend. He rarely gave interviews. He never bragged about the killing. When asked about it later in life, he gave a simple, practical answer. It was him or me. And I decided it wasn't going to be me. Leonard Funk died in 1992. He is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. But his story teaches us something terrifying and important about war. We like to think of heroes as giants, like John Wayne or Rambo. We like to think courage looks like muscles and bravado. But Leonard Funk was 5'5". He was a clerk. He was the guy you wouldn't look at twice in a grocery store. And yet, when the moment came, when the gun was in his stomach and death was staring him in the face, he found a reservoir of violence that saved his life. The laughter wasn't madness. It was a disconnect. It was the moment his brain realized that the rules of civilization didn't apply anymore. In that courtyard in Belgium, there were no rules. There was only the Thompson gun and the will to use it. The Germans made the mistake of judging the book by its cover. They saw a small man and assumed he was weak. They didn't know they were pointing a gun at the Grim Reaper himself. The lesson of Leonard Funk is simple. Never underestimate the quiet ones. And if you ever find yourself pointing a gun at a paratrooper and he starts laughing, you should probably start running. Because the joke is about to be on you. This is the story of the laughing killer. The story of the clerk who became a one-man army. And it is a reminder that in the chaos of World War II, the difference between life and death was often just a split second, a trigger pull, and a refusal to surrender. Subscribe to WW2 Declassified for more stories of the men who defied the odds and changed history.